We review logic we developed in the VR pawn to enable the HMD at runtime and cover essential settings and tips for packaging your project. We'll then prepare and modify our content to be package ready and test. A few videos ago, we added logic to our game mode to start in VR. Before we continue, let's remove that and reconnect the return value containing the default BPC starter pawn. Press play and let's test to make sure everything is spawning correctly. You will see that the start menu is a little different. I added an overlay to the hierarchy and a background blur below the button. I won't walk you through setting up our user button. I'm sure you could do it. Press start game in VR. Okay, we can see that VR pawn spawned correctly, but our HMD didn't turn on and Unreal Engine is not prepared for VR. That's okay because that's what we expected. Open BPC VR pawn. Let's review that enable HMD function again. We put this in to inform Unreal Engine to change to VR and activate our HMD, but this will not work in the engine. We do know that it is hooked up and we're confident that it will work after packaging. Let's adjust some project settings before we package. We won't spend too much time on it. I'll set the build configuration to shipping with a full rebuild and for distribution. Let's also set blueprint nativization method to exclusive. If this was the full and final project, this wouldn't be necessary, but for larger projects that contain blueprints that perform heavy calculations, this is highly recommended. C++ is much faster at processing than blueprints and every frame counts, especially in VR. The pawn that does the most processing would be our BPP pawn. Open class settings and set nativize to true. It's warned us that it also added a dependency to the list. If we go back to our project settings, we see that it added the blueprint interface. We can also see that it automatically added the child blueprints such as the VR pawn. Okay, the last thing we'll add to our blueprints are the functions to show mouse cursor when the game starts and hide it after user pressed start in VR. And finally, add an additional input call to BPP pawn. When escape is pressed on the keyboard, quit the game. There are a few more settings that I will adjust in the project settings. Here's a good guide of settings that Unreal Engine has compiled. Go through this for your HMD. To save rendering time, I turned on instant stereo. We will need to restart the editor and recompile shaders. While that is compiling, I'll adjust a few more settings for Oculus. Following that guide, I'll also turn off smooth frame rate. Okay, because we're not using Media Framework Utilities plugin, we need to remove some unused assets from our Virtual Studio migration. Inside of the Virtual Set folder, delete everything inside of the Blueprints folder. Also inside of the FBX importer folder, there is a blueprint named BP Scene node. Delete that as well. Lastly, delete everything in the Virtual Set Media folder. These are all assets that reference a plugin that we've turned off long ago. Alright, let's send this to package on Windows 64-bit. Open the .exe in the Windows No Editor folder. We are starting on PC with our start screen. When I press Start Game in VR, the HMD turned on, our Studio Showcase is playing in VR. It worked! We've covered a lot of ground in this course. If you think about the first video in the course when we were discussing the project goals, we spoke about what we wanted to accomplish. We migrated assets from a different project to use and added our own take on VR interaction. We built menus and reusable assets in UMG and learned about hierarchy within our blueprints. We created a way to display a real-time video feed of our scene for us to view on a 3D map spawned by our motion controllers with 2 view modes for us to travel the scene. We added a fade from our camera controller to play during teleportation and added VR hands to help us further interact in 3D. And finally, we packaged all our work into a runnable program. I had fun. In the final video, we discuss where we go from here. I talk about a few ideas on what you could do to take it even further and reveal the inspiration behind this course.